Afternoon and welcome to our live today. We're going to be talking about how important effective communication is to our mental health.
And we're going to be answering all your questions about it as well. We collect these questions from like social media over the week if anyone has these questions, and we also put in common questions that we've got asked about this thing. But we do, of course, if you have any questions, we've got the chat on the side that you can ask any questions.
So please fire away. So just before we start, my name is Neil, and my trusted colleague right next to me is Jazz.
Hello.
So hello, Jazz. It's good to see you guys. So due to the current kind of situation, we've decided that it's really important that we can support as many people as possible. And as the pandemic has started to lift, thankfully the service is kind of evolving as a direct result of that, and we're doing a lot of stuff in-house now. But we also are mindful that we need to make sure that we get to as many people as we possibly can, hence the reasons why we are now doing these public lives. So those of you may be streaming this on Facebook, it might be on YouTube, so welcome. So that's the reasons why we've started to do these public lives. And we've also come to the point where it's really important where people that actually come onto these things, that they have direct questions around some of the issues that you might be facing. So we pick a subject matter on a weekly basis now, and we ask pre this Friday afternoon for any questions that you have to post them during the week, and then we get a selection of those together like Jasmine has explained. So we will kind of deal with some of those that we've had this week, and then it's 5-10 minutes time, it's just a Q&A for you guys. So if there's anything that comes to mind, we'd really encourage you to try and pop them on so that either Jazz and I can give you an overview and give you some ideas of what helped us in terms of getting ourselves back to wellness. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview as to where we found some of these things to be really, really important on our well-being. And that's the reason why we're doing a different subject matter each week, because it came very apparent to myself, and I'm sure Jazz would probably agree with me, that it's not just one individual thing that might be causing us struggles. And we talk about a lot of these subject matters because some of us are conscious of the things that we know that are actually creating unwellness for it, but there's also some elements where you don't even recognize that that kind of situation may lie somewhere else. So that's why we do different subject matters on different times. And today we're going to talk about effective communication, because again, when I was not particularly well, I didn't realize how much of an importance it was in effective communication. And effective communication is not just about how we communicate, it's how we communicate to actually make sure that our needs are being met. So it also encompasses things like being assertive and assertive behavior, because that's vital if you're having conversations that can cause conflict in themselves. And I'm sure we'll probably share some of our experiences where we kind of developed that, and it gave us a sense of being listened to effectively. And when we communicate, we're fully aware of how we communicate to ensure that not only our needs are met, but other people's needs are met also.
And I think it might be really good when we're starting off to actually answer the first question as a part of this, and it is, Neil and Jazz, did you struggle to communicate, and how did that affect you? I mean, in my personal experience, communication was something that I just thought was words. So I was quite loud in my opinion. I was quite forward with my beliefs and things like that, to the point where it caused conflict, and I just shut. And I stopped talking, I stopped trying to get my needs met, and then because I didn't have a very good self-esteem as well, I didn't really feel that my voice deserved to be heard in a way. So I did shut myself down a little bit, and I didn't communicate effectively. And struggling to communicate is something that it can come for a load of different reasons, and um, it varied in dealing with it. It varied in how to kind of cope with it. For example, if I'm in a sensory overload, I just can't communicate and I have to find other ways. And the importance of other types of communication that aren't just the words we say, because I can struggle with that as well. But it's those kind of elements of actually how to effectively communicate and get your needs met, and the reasons why I was communicating as well. Was I communicating to get my needs met, or was I communicating just to get my point across?
That's quite an interesting point in itself, isn't it? Because I think in a communication, any type of communication, both individuals have a need that they want to get met in some respects. What happened in my experience is probably the same as Jasmine's, is over a period of time you kind of just get ground down because you feel you're not being listened to, your needs are not being met, so you kind of close down and you don't communicate effectively. And when you have to, you find yourself being very frustrated, very angry, and then the message that you really started with gets completely lost, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because people then look at and think that you're being aggressive or you're taking advantage of people. And in my experience, I wasn't even aware of that initially. And when I got to the point where I kind of understood, I was able to actually kind of set myself out prior to having any kind of communication that I needed to get something from. Sometimes that communication would lead to things like, if my needs are not being met, then I have to find a different way, and that brought in compromise.
Yeah.
And compromise in lots of situations is really important. But the thing that you've got to remember, or for me, Jasmine, was your needs are still there. So when you communicate, there's different ways of communication. And we'll talk about that because that question leads into that, doesn't it? How many of us, sorry Jazz, very quickly, how many of us think that communication's all about words?
Yeah. And that's one of the areas, is there's a lot more factors into trying to communicate effectively than just talking. One of the elements I certainly struggled with was timing of those words. I was somebody who felt very angry and frustrated about my situation, to the point where, firstly, I became quite defensive, and I wasn't able to compromise in a conversation. And also, I would pick famously the wrong timings to approach really tricky situations. Usually, when I was in the heat of an argument, I would suddenly start to pull out all of the other things that I was angry about because they matched my current mood. And all that did, even though I felt that I needed to get that out, I needed to get my needs met in that respect, because the timing wasn't there, it wasn't productive for anybody. It certainly wasn't productive for my needs. It wasn't productive for the needs of the person I was having this conversation with, and it wasn't really productive to moving forward in any kind of relationship or situation, or kind of getting things running smoothly again. And yeah, communication is something that it's so based on what you can control as a person, so how you communicate, and it's about remembering that ultimately a communication is between two people or a group of people. It's around multiple people if you're communicating with people, and you can't necessarily control the reactions or the reactions or the influence or anything like that on that other person. That person will choose to react in the way they want to, will choose to take what they want out of that conversation. They might take it the right way and you'll come to a compromise. They might take it the wrong way, but if you reflected on it and realised, oh, actually, I did communicate that right, it was just that person wasn't ready to hear that, or didn't want to hear that, or the timing was off, then it's taking that responsibility back off of yourself.
And that's a really good point. And some of those subjects or questions, hopefully, that will come up a little bit later, we can actually give you some kind of helpful hints that might help you out. But a question for you guys that are out there is, do you ever struggle with communication? Whether that be with children, or whether it would be with close partners, or relationships in your family or your parents.
Well, like medical professionals, we see that all the time, don't we, where people struggle to talk to certain medical, their GPs and things like that, or different people, professionals. It's the thing about, do you complain at a restaurant if your food's cold?
Yes.
I had this conversation with somebody the other day, and even though I'm quite good at communicating, I still don't do that. Even though I'm paying for a service, I still feel, for some reason, I feel rude.
Yes.
Asking that. In the chat, hello to everybody in the chat, by the way, and we forgot to say before we started, please do answer these questions and feedback whatever you feel like you want to feedback. Obviously you don't have to, but if you have a point to say about what we're saying, if you agree with us, if you disagree with us, if you want to have your own input on that, please do get involved, and we will put it up on we might put it up on the screen, so just be mindful of that. It does come up on the overlay. But if you want to get involved, please do.
Absolutely.
We want to have this conversation to be as in the moment as possible with everybody.
So just going back to what Jazz alluded to, a few minutes ago, there's different elements of communications, and some of us feel that we actually communicate with words only. So it's just a really quick oversight. I was completely unaware, and this is what helped me out enormously, is there's other times or other things that are involved. Jasmine picked up on one perfectly, and that is the timing of when you're having those conversations. And the most important one for me was the kind of communication that you do that is almost you're not aware of unless you start to work around it, and that's things like body language.
Oh yeah.
Body language, we can find ourselves, especially when we're having difficult conversations, you can do things that actually send the incorrect message. I've had experiences myself talking about when you're trying to get something from a service that you might have gone to, and this was it was retail service actually, and they talked in jargon, and they talked about how they can provide things, and I wasn't getting that message, and I was getting confused, and jargon's an important thing there.
Oh yeah.
So after a period of time, I felt my needs were not getting met. It was just a simple question that I was asking. I started to subconsciously use my body language, and I did things like this, and I did things like rolling my eyes, and that does actually send a message to the recipient, and it's the totally wrong message. So the recipient, from that point of view, probably thought that I was starting to get angry, and they probably started to then think that I was being unreasonable, and all of those elements. So it's important communication that we recognise that it's not so much about the words. Only 7% of the words that we use is what the people see or hear. Body language, believe it or not, Jasmine, is way over 50% of what that recipient receives.
And even going away from like statistics and stuff, we don't value the other types of communication enough. We don't value things like the tone we use. We don't value the things, the non-direct communication like eye contact and body language, the way we're sitting and standing. Are you standing in a position like open body language or closed body language? One of mine, I'm quite comfortable with my arms crossed. And it's not because I'm trying to close the conversation off, but it's because that's the way it's perceived. One of the biggest ones for me was eye contact, purely on the basis that I get distracted quite easily. So I will be looking over here, I'll be fully listening, but I'll be looking at the wall, or I'll be looking at the light and things like that. And if I don't disclose, I'm sorry if I don't make eye contact, I am listening. It's just that I can't, I sometimes am focusing in different areas. It can cause a conflict because people don't think I'm listening, or people are then distracted by my distraction. And there is that element of, okay, what do I need to communicate in order to make sure this conversation is going to go? It's all back to, it's communicating how to communicate.
Absolutely, you've hit the nail on the head. It's communicating and understanding how to communicate.
I saw it in the GP surgery once, and it was a really, really interesting example of this. There was a lady who really did struggle to get up, so she didn't get up to greet somebody in the GP surgery, and this person got really upset at the fact that they didn't stand up in order to greet them.
Yes.
Because there is that kind of manner thing of, you know, if you're talking to somebody, you meet their eyes or some. They
Yes.
had that was their core value, that they wanted to have that mutual level. This person could not get up easily, so they chose to stay seated.
Yeah.
And there was this conflict. And actually, how much of that is the responsibility of the person who's trying to limit pain, you know, listen to their body,
Yeah.
and how much of that was an assumption made by somebody else's core values. And everybody's got their own view on manners, everyone's got their views on language, everyone's got their own views on acceptable communication styles, and things like eye contact, things like moving around in your seat, things that we're told in school are bad to do, like rock on your chair,
Yes.
or
Yes.
move around. That actually, for some people, it really does help for them to do that, to be able to better communicate.
Absolutely.
And at that point, it's about, okay, is it my problem, or is it because it's against my core value, or is it because I don't think that's I think that's rude, or I think that's unfair, or, you know, is it actually unfair or rude, or is it just my personal beliefs, and it's something that we have to, as society, as people, adapt to the fact that everybody's going to have their different view on acceptable communication.
And in terms of what you've been talking about, we need to kind of understand things like what fits within our core values, but on the other side of that is what fits with other people's core values. We have to set certain boundaries, like we have to understand that other people have boundaries.
Absolutely.
So communication in itself is quite a big subject matter.
We've got a comment here from Natasha. Hi Natasha, I hope you're well. Body language speaks volumes to me, along with facial expressions. I struggle to directly look at people when I'm speaking, and I'm always worried that that may come across as rude. I felt this way as well. I've certainly felt this way, because I don't like to make eye contact sometimes, and I guess it's about reminding yourself that, you know, if you are worried about that, and you're worried about seeing people are coming across believing that, it might be worth, for your own peace of mind and your own worries, to say, I might drift away, I might look away, but that's not because I'm trying to be rude, it's just because I sometimes struggle with eye contact. If you don't feel like you have to do that, absolutely fine. But it's a really good point, Natasha, and thank you for bringing that in. It does cause that internal anxiety if you do struggle with things that other people don't tend to worry about too much.
And I agree. You know, part of my sort of development for myself was when I start to go into conversations, and that comment that just come up there, is you do get that emotional reaction. You do get that feeling. But I think if you're from the onset, tell people that you have something that you need to communicate, and obviously let them know that you might actually have a learning disability, or you might actually roll your eyes. It's not that you're not interested, it's just that I need to put this point across.
Pain is another one. If you're in pain a lot, if you have chronic pain or something like that, your facial expressions might not be fine and dandy and happy all the time. If you're having a rough time for whatever reason, or if you do have, like you say, learning difficulties, or struggle with social interaction, or a social disability or something like that, there is some elements where you can really struggle. Like pain is the simplest one to explain, because everyone understands pain. If you're in a lot of pain, you know, it's okay to not be cheery and the most receptive in that moment. Obviously, you might need to revert and say, I'm really sorry for how I was the other day because I was in a lot of pain, or just to disclose that before you have the conversation. I might seem like I'm a bit off, but it's just because I'm in pain. But actually, it's important that this conversation is, again, timing. If you're in a lot of pain and someone comes up to you and starts wanting to have full in-depth conversations that you need to have a lot of listening skills in, and you're in absolute agony, say I broke my leg and I'm in A&E and someone comes up to me and says, do you want to renew your car insurance? In that very moment, I'm not going to be the most receptive to that comment. I'm going to be like, I'd say, I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to call you back because I'm in hospital and I've broken my leg, and I might swear at you if someone's trying to set my leg.
And that is also an important part, Jasmine, from when we started, isn't it? We've got to understand there's different elements, and you just alluded to there about timing.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we've all had experiences where maybe our timing's out. You know, I'm a situation that might occur is if you kind of come home after a hard day's work, and let's just say your partner's been at home all day, she's looked after the children, etc., etc., and then you open up the door and she starts to tell you all about the struggles that she's had during the day. The recipient might not be in the right frame of mind to just be able to say, oh, I really do appreciate you've had a bad day, etc. It might be just, I don't need this at the moment. So timing is really, really important, especially when you're dealing with kind of communication that might mean something and you have to have your needs met. So it's a really good point that you picked up there. So I think really just to move on, because we'll grab some more in a minute, is when we communicate, you've got to remember that there's all the different elements. The biggest one is the body language, but then you've got the vocal, and then you've got the tone that you use. So there's a whole lot that you need to start thinking about.
Absolutely.
So there's another one popped up. I would try doing that straight. Oh, this is Natasha. Thank you, Natasha. I would try doing that straight off in future rather than worry about it during and after. Which again, this is what these sessions are about. And I always kind of try, because us guys have, we've all had lived experience. We know exactly where you guys are coming from. And one of the key things here is when we actually talk about these things is if you've gained something from it, and these are the things that kind of helped me out of where I was, and it probably helped you out without a doubt. I can now kind of communicate quite effectively. I'm not saying I communicate effectively every time, but I can certainly say that I can communicate effectively, and people understand that I'm communicating something that I need, whether that be I need you to help me out on something, or I need you to understand I'm having an emotional reaction as a result of this. So it does help. So that's really good that you can take that away.
And of course, the advice that we give, or the comments that or what worked well for us, might not work well for somebody else, because ultimately, when we're communicating between, let's say, two people, if you're communicating with two people have very different beliefs. Every human being has a very different belief on what's acceptable and what's a good communication, or what barriers they have in communication, even down to the most simplest things like language. Some people might speak different languages. So at that moment, it's okay for us not to be perfect and to pick up skills and tools that work for us. But also, as you said, every single person in this world isn't going to be completely fantastic communicators all the time. Even people who work in the field probably have moments where they aren't communicating as effectively. But that's okay. That's a part of being human. And I think to be a good communicator isn't to have perfect communication styles 24/7. It is just about being able to reflect and say, okay, what's working well? Or actually, is this something I do constantly? Or is this something that I allow constantly that I don't like? Or I'm not getting my needs met because of it? And if your answer is, I am not getting my needs met because I'm not communicating properly, then it's about working on communication at that moment. But actually, if you communicate really well and you recognise that there isn't so much issue with communication, it's okay to say, I'm actually quite a good communicator, even if I'm not perfect at it. It leads us on quite well to this question. It's actually the first question, but me and Neil have this habit of jumping questions, don't we?
We do, yeah.
Because we like to just go into topic.
Yeah.
Why? It's a very simple question. Why is good communication important? And it comes back to needs, doesn't it? And getting your needs met.
Absolutely. Communication. Why good communication is important. Absolutely fundamental. It gets your needs met. It won't get your needs met all the time, and there's different elements of how you can start possibly working on communication skills. But when you're having any kind of communication, there is obviously a need. It might be from ourselves, or it might be from the person that is communicating with us. And if we don't get that right, then that can lead to lots of other things, can't it? And I've heard many people saying that because of the way that they communicate, they get frustrated, they close themselves down, they are starting to get worried about telling people how they're feeling and all those kinds of things. And that actually exacerbates our mental health. So the more that we can kind of work out how to communicate, one, you'll get your needs met a lot easier, and there's different elements to that as well. You know, when we're talking about communication, or I certainly did in my experience, fell over quite a lot in listening to people.
Yeah.
Because, you know, when we're having these real critical conversations, we can focus on making sure that our needs are met. And when we're in heightened emotions, in terms of, let's just say for argument's sake, you're getting frustrated with somebody and you're trying to communicate how frustrated you are, automatically people may respond and you may be triggered by something. But then the art of listening disappears, because what happens in your head is you kind of start thinking about how you're going to respond rather than listening to the whole kind of thing. Have you found that yourself?
Oh yeah. So I mean, in my case, because I had a very low self-worth, I didn't think much of myself at all, to the point where, because I believed stuff about myself, the only things that I was really listening to were negative feedback, and it was kind of fueling my belief. And what I ended up doing was, really, I was creating this conversation that I had with somebody, not based on actually listening to what they said, but picking out bits that I guess conformed to the storyline I had in my head, that rhetoric I was giving to myself. One of the examples that I can give as an experience, as somebody who's been in a lot of mental health services, when I used to ring somebody like the crisis team and I wasn't very well, I would, because I was expecting that conversation to be the one that you all hear is going to happen, the kind of have a cup of tea and have a bath, even though they gave me about half an hour's worth of really good advice that I could take and use, because I wasn't listening to that. What I was actually listening to was what I was wanting to expect from that conversation, which was the distraction techniques that get spoken about. I almost blocked that side out, blocked the good advice out of it, and my head went to, they only told me to have a cup of tea and a bath. And it wasn't I wasn't trying to avoid, or I wasn't necessarily going with the, I was trying to reach out for help, but my brain wasn't in the right mindset to really take it. What I needed was to de-escalate at that moment, and that comes back to timing.
Absolutely, and this is where it all links in, isn't it? I remember conversations that I've had, and I've come away from those conversations and kind of said to myself, I don't even know what was said in that conversation. And as Jazz said, I picked up the things that would either connect with my self-belief at that point in time, or the things that are negative, the responses that I didn't expect to get, and I connected with those, and then you just come away from that. So a real open question for you guys that are streaming with us is, how many times have you felt that you've not been listened to effectively?
We have a question about that, actually.
Do we?
Well, it's this one. Why don't people listen? We've got quite a few questions that go on to the same thing of why don't people listen?
Right.
Why don't people understand? And there is of course that element, isn't there, of it's really just about saying who is responsible in the situation, and it's not. And responsibility doesn't mean blame. Responsibility just means in a conversation there are two parts, and we can only actually if it's a communication between us and the receiver or the receivers. We can only control one element of that, and that is how we are communicating. The timing in which we're communicating, the space that we're choosing to do that, the words that we're using, the body language we're saying, and actually, is that person ready to listen? Do we think that person is really ready? Are we going to get our needs met from this conversation? We unfortunately, fortunately in the fact that, and unfortunately, we can't necessarily control if somebody's going to listen, if somebody's going to take that well. I used to get quite frustrated when I was trying to explain why I was feeling unwell to family members who didn't understand mental health. So I was using the big terms that I'd learned through therapy. I was using the big terms that I'd learned or I'd researched, like splitting and things like these. These kind of language terms that we use, we get told that we do in appointments and things like that. I was using these terms to people who did not really understand what that meant, and then I'd get frustrated when they weren't reciprocating how I wanted them to. Because you do tend to prep how you think a conversation's going to go, don't you?
Oh, without a doubt. But, you know, a key thing for me was sometimes you just want somebody to listen to you. I have found, I don't know if you've had this experience, guys, and Jasmine, where you just want somebody to listen to you and understand how you're feeling emotionally, kind of where you are. And I kept getting people that would just want to give me advice. And I learned very quickly, sometimes I don't need advice, I just need understanding, because I don't want a fixer. You know, most of the situations I found myself in, I could deal with myself, as long as people understood kind of my thoughts around things and my feelings around things. So I don't know if you guys have that kind of struggle, but listening is a fundamental part of our mental well-being. So if you get into a situation, it helps us if we can listen effectively. And what I mean by listen effectively is to actually use the right kind of body language, behaviour, so that the person knows that they're being listened to.
Yeah. It's really hard in the sense that this particular question, when we're talking about people taking responsibility into what they can control, it doesn't mean that if someone isn't listening to you that it is your fault, and it doesn't mean that it is your responsibility to fix. But what is really important is that we reflect, if a conversation or something hasn't gone well, and we don't feel like we've been listened to, and if you're angry about that, divert that conversation. I would say just back away until you've got that, you've turned that anger into assertiveness. If we go straight into an argument, it will escalate. But it is about asking those questions to ourselves of actually, and it's something as simple as, and it does seem a bit convoluted sometimes, it does seem a little bit of saying what went well in that conversation, what didn't go well, and what actually were the barriers, what stopped us from communicating properly. Was it the fact that they got defensive over a certain subject? Was it the fact that they weren't attentive? Were they watching something? Were they doing something at the time that we interrupted? Or were they just not ready to hear that? Do they just not want to hear that? Is that our responsibility? No, it isn't. Nobody's at blame. It is just about learning how to communicate with people, because I will communicate with you in a certain way, in a way that I would never communicate to another person in my life, because they would react differently
that situation. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I think that kind of, when you have relationships, especially work relationships, you get a clear understanding when you're kind of with somebody for quite a period of time. And like Jasmine says, the way that she communicates with me is different than she would communicate with maybe another one of our work colleagues, because there needs to be an understanding, and she's fully aware, same as I am with Jasmine, that if you don't communicate in the way that she will actually receive that well, then it's going to get lost. But going back to that listening, I've now, and this might be something that you guys might want to try, is if somebody says, I need to have a conversation with you, or I just need to listen, I always, and I'm sure my colleagues will tell you that I do this, is I will start that conversation with, would you like me to listen, or would you like some advice? And it kind of almost empowers that person to say what they really want at that point in time. I just want you to listen. Okay, well, I'm not going to advise you. I'll listen, and I'll show you what you need at the time, and that's support, love, affection, whatever it might be. And I'm sure you guys may well have come away from conversations like that where it just makes you feel better. It makes you feel like somebody understands me, somebody has listened to me. And then you come away from that, I certainly found this myself, is you kind of, because you've got the relief, you don't need enabling, you don't need somebody to tell you what to do and how to do it. It just feels better that it's off your chest and somebody's kind of listened to you properly.
Got a couple of comments.
Go on.
Natasha is, we've got a few, so I think good communication is needed mostly so everyone can understand each other's needs. I just don't think I actually speak up enough to communicate well. And these are things that we work on over time. Natasha, since we've spoken before about communication, since you've had your journey with us and been through, has that improved? Have you been able to improve that? And actually seeing that as a success, I think sometimes we judge our success and when it's completed, but actually if you are better at communicating than you were a few months ago, then have a look at that and see how far you've come about. We gain confidence, because confidence comes into communication a lot, doesn't it?
Definitely.
And actually, if you don't feel confident to get your needs met, you don't feel confident in your own self-belief or your self-worth, it can be really difficult to then assert your needs, because the confidence isn't there. It's a little bit like trying to drive away with no fuel in the tank. If you've not got that power, if you've not got that reason, or if you've not got that reason behind it, it can be really difficult to then assert your needs. And it's okay to say I'm really good at communicating, but actually I need the confidence, I need the fuel to be able to go through that. And on the follow-up, I struggle not to jump in with some kind of solution, help or advice. How can I tell if that's not what they want from me? That does go back to just asking. I understand this completely in the fact that when I first started this job, if someone came to me wanting to talk and wanting to have a conversation, because I was quite new to the job and because it was all fresh in my mind, I was excited about it. I went very much into work mode accidentally, and I started to just advise. And I started to just go, well, have you tried going to your GP? Have you tried using some breathing techniques? Have you tried looking at stop? And I went into CBT techniques straight away because that's what I was working on and studying. And I got some very fruitful answers to that, let's say, because they didn't want me to be a therapist. They didn't want me to be their mental health worker. They just wanted me to listen.
Yeah.
And some people just want you to go, yeah, you go, girl, you get out of that situation, and give them that confidence. And the way I did that was exactly what you said, and exactly what we would say is just ask. Do you want me to listen? Do you want me to just agree with you and let you get that out, or do you want me to actually
give you some
advice?
Yes. Just on the back of that, the last bit that in that comment is, I've learnt not everybody wants that all of the time from me. How do I effectively stop doing it? Well, to be honest, it's not an overnight fix. I think personally, when I became aware of certain things, it became kind of not hard work, but it became kind of in my focus, and practice is really, really important. So on the back of that, how do you stop yourself from doing something? It's just repeating. When you know something is working more effectively, then it's not drifting back to where you know things didn't work effectively. So it's just practice. It's almost, you would practice anything, would you not? Until it becomes kind of subconsciously natural to us. And so in answer to that, that is purely just practice. You have the awareness, you need to practice that awareness, and once you practice it, it becomes a natural thing. And it was a bit like I said, and Jasmine will probably back me up. I have a number of people that come to me and say, I want to have a chat. And that's the first thing I always jump to, and I do it subconsciously now, is do you want me to listen to you, or do you want me to advise you? And the power that that gives them is massive, because they'll say you don't want anything more than them to listen. So you're not kind of under pressure yourself to try and advise. You're just a pair of ears. So,
and confidence is another thing that comes into it, is boundaries. If you don't want to have that conversation at that moment, so for example, I used to be very much a people pleaser. I put everybody's needs before my own, and if you've got loads of people coming to you expecting you to solve issues for them, or expecting you to listen to everything they've got to say, or to take abuse, or to take their offloading all the time, and actually you've done it before, but you don't feel it's productive for you anymore. You don't feel it's going to get your needs met. It doesn't think it's going to get a solution to the current situation. For example, if somebody would just say the same thing over and over again, and it would just become to the point where it's okay to actually go, I don't really feel like I'm the best person to talk about this right now. I don't feel like I'm in the right headspace to have this conversation right now. It doesn't mean that you're in the wrong here. It doesn't mean that I don't care. It's just at this moment you're not going to get the response out of me that you want. And it comes down to, there's another comment. I think it's important to have people. Oh, sorry, I've lost the comment now. I think it's important to have people who will actually listen to you in order to feel heard and supported. I have really struggled with certain family members and an old friend who don't seem to be able to try and see things from my point of view. I hate being misunderstood, so I tend to over-explain.
That's a very interesting comment, and we'll go into another little bit that I've kind of worked on really hard, on my journey, and that is about the behaviours that we might show when we communicate, especially with family members and close people, or people that are close to you. And that is really kind of around assertive behaviour and how we can actually be more assertive to enable people to understand you a bit more. So when it says you really find that people that are close to you will understand you and they listen to you attentively, they may well fall into a trap themselves where they become supportive, possibly in the wrong way sometimes, and they struggle when you might have a communication back to them that they feel that they've resolved as a direct, as your conversation happens. So when we've become quite assertive, which I'll talk about in a minute if there's any comments coming up, that's a really important part, because we can, when we're struggling with stuff like this, we can become very submissive at times. We can, without a doubt, move it into aggressive assertion and non-aggressive. So there's different elements in that kind of conversation. And when you have close family members, you get that element of trust and understanding that you're going to be listened to. But if you don't do it in the right way, yourself and other people tend to kind of close down, and then you move towards miscommunication again.
I guess one of the things on your question, Lucy, and thank you very much for bringing it in, I think it's really important, is actually saying to yourself, sometimes when we're really communicating and trying to get our needs met and trying to explain why we're feeling the way we're feeling, is it because we're not communicating it properly, or is it because there is a lack of understanding from the other side? And actually, even though they should listen, you feel that they should listen, their family, and they should understand, if they're not understanding, it's clear that they just don't understand your point of view, it is okay at that point to say, okay, I need to get this particular need and this particular conversation met by somebody who does understand. And it's okay, even though it can be quite frustrating when you expect a family member to know and to definitely understand your point of view and to agree with you and to back you up. If that need isn't being met, and there's no, and again going back to that control thing, we can't control people's reactions, it's okay to say, all right, I'm going to get my needs met in this respect from somebody else. I'm going to get it from a friend that does understand, a family member that does understand, a service that I might be under, or actually I'm going to try and meet people who are like-minded.
Yes.
It's a little bit, if you take it really simply, if you take mental health out of it completely, it's like when you're trying to communicate with somebody who doesn't speak English or doesn't speak your first language. Even though you can try and communicate in other ways, it can be frustrating, not for their fault, not for your fault, because there's a barrier. There's a barrier in the way they communicate. And it is okay at that point to either get somebody in, a third party, who will help to be able to mediate that translation, or kind of get that conversation and make it into smaller and manageable chunks, get rid of jargon, say it a little bit more simply, in a way that they will understand, or actually find somebody who is going to be able to get that need met. Find somebody who is able to communicate in the way that you understand. And all of this, when we talk about any kind of changes of communication, it is not your fault. It is the responsibility of everybody in that conversation to have that productive conversation. Yes, there's things that we can work for, there's things that we can change, but actually it is not just our responsibility to make sure that we're communicating properly. It is the responsibility of everybody in that party. There's things that we can do to improve our communication. There's things that we can do to limit frustration and to actually adapt to the timings and the situation. So there's things we can do, but responsibility never means fault.
Absolutely.
It can do, but it can mean fault. But actually, responsibility in this case is around saying, okay, I'm responsible to what I'm responsible for, not I'm responsible for this entire conversation.
And that leads on to something that I'd like to kind of talk about briefly, is how many of us at times struggle to say no.
Oh, yes.
In terms of whether it be family, whether it be close people, whether it be neighbours, whether it be at work. And I often find people struggle to say exactly what they need to say, and this is going to lead to assertive behaviour in a minute. I will link it together.
Yeah.
But a quick question to you guys that are on here. How many people struggle to say no? Because it's perfectly normal for us to say no. And I'll give you a very quick overview of how important it is that we actually look at our own mental well-being, because it does have an effect if we don't have the possibility or the nonce to be able to say no to somebody. I've had situations at work where I'm the kind of guy that says I want to support everybody, so people would possibly bring me some workload, and I've got a workload myself, but I think I can't say no to Jasmine because she's under pressure as well. Give it to me, Jasmine. And over a period of time, it has a massive impact on my own mental well-being. So a trick that I had to learn was actually being comfortable with saying no. I had a situation just the other day, Jasmine. I went out and mowed my front lawn. And because I live somewhere where the majority of people are there, they're retirement age, and they struggle physically to get around, and somebody approached me and said, would you mind just running it over my garden? So I said, yes, of course, no problem. After about 3 weeks, I had about 5 people that were coming to me and asking if I could do them the same favour. And then I started to realise, well, hang on, that was the weekend that my son had an important football match, but I'd committed to the fact that I'd help my neighbours out and had to miss my son's football. So then that made me feel like I'd let him down and all those kinds of things. So it is a skill in itself.
You hear the term people pleasing a lot.
God,
that's why I brought this question up, is that if we're so used to people pleasing, or we're so used to that being a way that we're getting our own needs met. So if you're used to I was very prone to avoiding my own well-being, avoiding taking responsibility for myself by actively trying to help others and use that as a distraction technique, to the point where I became dependent on other people's need for that. I felt dependent on the fact that I was responsible for somebody, or I was responsible for somebody's well-being. And it's about healthy boundaries in it. I work in healthcare, you work in a healthcare, but technically if we call it, health and social care setting where that's your job, there's a difference between being paid for it and then using it as kind of a as a distraction technique. And actually your well-being, your self-worth does not revolve on acts of service. Your well-being and your personality and your views on the world are yours and yours only, and you deserve to be able to get your needs met. You deserve to be able to have boundaries. That is not a rude thing to do. It's not a rude thing to say no. It's not a rude thing to say, I am not the best person to speak to about this. And it's not rude to say, I don't want to do that. Because yes, there's going to be people who have the guilt mentality of, you did it before, or there's going to be people who don't understand that mentality. But in this case, nobody is entitled to your time. If you choose to give your time away, if you're contracted to give your time away, for example through work, that's different. But actually, if you're doing somebody a favor, if you're doing somebody if you're being there for somebody, being a human, connecting with people, you don't actually owe anybody any time. You owe yourself the time If you choose to delegate that time to somebody else and say, I'm going to help this person, and if you choose to mow everybody's lawns and help people in that way, that's your own choice. It's not your requirement.
And you've got a really good point there, and we often talk about balance, don't we? Yeah. And sometimes when we become kind of a yes-no person, as you put it, or we feel that we are being supportive and all those kinds of things, we have to be aware when it starts to have an impact on ourselves. That's not saying that you should, I should never mow their lawn ever again. I should have key things almost in my toolbox that I can use, and one of those things is to become a little bit assertive and having a balance, going back to people and say, no, I can't do that, not right now, but that's not saying that I won't do it, but the timing is not right. Yeah. And some people really struggle with that kind of stuff, don't they? And we kind of find ourselves losing focus on what impact that is having to us as individuals. Imagine all situations when you kind of go into any conversations and you come away and what do you feel? You feel sometimes that you're angry because your needs are not being met. It might be that you've not shown enough assertive behaviour. It might be that your body language was wrong. So like I said at the beginning, it's very, very complex when you're talking about how to communicate effectively.
Yeah.
So one of the key, or a couple of the key things is boundary setting. But a lot of people struggle with setting boundaries. And secondly, a lot of people don't understand, like Jazz has just said, is our boundaries are unique to us. And they have to sit within your core values and your beliefs. Yeah. And sometimes we are so fixated on our own boundaries and making sure people don't overstep our boundaries. And you try and work hard to do that. But sometimes their boundaries might be too high, too low, and that's where we need to find balance and compromise.
And you'll find people, the more you assert the boundaries that are going to be good for you, you're going to find people who align with your boundaries and respect those boundaries. If you are struggling, so when I had to put boundaries down, a lot of people in my life really struggled with that because I went from being completely boundaryless, someone who anybody could come to for anything, to suddenly being really boundaried, and they thought it was because I thought I was better than them. It thought that it was because I didn't like them anymore, or I didn't want to be involved with them anymore. When actually, it was just because I needed to put those. And in hindsight, I went about it too harshly, and it's something that. But I'm not going to blame myself for that. It's a learning experience, isn't it? But over time, by reinforcing those boundaries, the people who did have an issue with it, they either realised, oh look, okay, this is not a bad thing, this is not against me, this is just Jazz trying to move on or move forward, and it helped us to really build that relationship even stronger than before. Or I just met people who also aligned with my core values, and there was that communication started to flow naturally because I was actually talking to the right people, and it helped me to be boundaried with myself as well. That I couldn't go into every situation and just talk about everything.
Yeah.
Every people had different areas that I could speak to them about in my life. Like I couldn't go to one person and speak to about my mental health because they didn't understand it, and that was okay. But I could speak to them about the football. I could speak to them about come dine with me. I could speak to them about video games. And there was this person who I could speak to about my other interests. There was this person I could speak to about mental health. Helped me to use it helped me to use the services that I was under much more effectively because I was using the right channel to get support, and it also helped to take communication away from being a personal attack and seeing it as this thing that we do and everybody struggles with to a certain extent. Everyone's good at it and everyone's bad at it.
Absolutely, I agree. But going back to boundary setting, that was a big struggle for me, but it was surprising actually, Jazz, because I quickly found out that people started to understand. I had people kind of around me that I felt took advantage of me at times. But once I actually told them or set my boundaries, a lot of people just went, do you know, I've actually mistreated that person, or I've dealt with them incorrectly. And a lot of people, to be fair, completely understood. And then those people that didn't had a kind of an understanding around it, and they wanted to reach a compromise. I don't entirely agree with what you're saying, Neil, but I accept some elements of that. And I said something like, I don't entirely agree with what you say, Jazz, but let's work together and come to a compromise. And that was so much more healthier for my communications, especially around work and family members.
You're not going to meet everybody. Everybody's going to have areas of communication where they don't agree with that, or they don't agree with somebody's views, or they don't agree with somebody's choices. Things that's stuff we can compromise on, isn't it? And if we can't compromise on it, it's okay to not get involved in that area of their life, or to not get involved with them if it's too, it's about saying to yourself, when you set boundaries for yourself, you're more likely to be able to compromise because the boundaries are set, as opposed to they vary day to day. If they're set and you know your boundaries, you can say, okay, I'll compromise on that because I know where my boundaries are. It's hard to compromise with a boundary that's not set, isn't it?
Yes. That's a really interesting question, because you do need to set boundaries. But the other thing that I learned, Jazz, I don't know if you did, is they have to be flexible at times.
Absolutely. That's where I fell.
Exactly.
Because I used to set boundaries too firm.
Yeah, you become so rigid, don't you? And then that becomes something difficult to get over. And I learned quite quickly that they do have to be kind of flexible. Certain ones, for me, are not flexible, and some of them there is no compromise. And I had to make some real conscious, difficult decisions in terms of maybe discarding people that I thought were friends, which clearly are not friends anymore. So it kind of helped me out massively, but I also, you fell into the trap a bit like I did initially. Have to understand the boundary setting is vital, but also flexibility is vital, and that links straight back to compromise and all those kinds of areas.
And it leads, this is probably going to be our last question, because I'm quite conscious we've got 3 minutes left.
Oh, we haven't got that long.
We've spoken for a while.
Wow.
But it's good to leave on just answering what can I do to better my communication. Thank you for a start for everyone to getting involved. And we are reading the chat, and we can see the chat, but sometimes we can't answer everything, and that's just how it works sometimes. Talking about what can we do to better our communication, I think firstly is going in a non-judgmental setting from all perspective. If you're going in with the expectation that, so say you really struggle to talk to someone at the bank, let's use that as an example. If you're going in there going from not being able to speak to them at all to being able to speak to them perfectly, if you go in with the expectation that you should be able to expertly talk to them, you might set yourself up to fail. If you've not done a practice, if you've not gone through that at the start, you might set yourself up with too many expectations. And it's okay at this moment to say, I am in a different place. I'm not going to be able to communicate as well as everybody else right now.
Absolutely.
But it's because I'm learning. It's not because I'm not going to get to that point. It's going to take more than going from not being able to completely perfect at it. So non-judgmental is really important, I think.
And the way I would answer that question, Jazz, my lived experience on this is, what can I do to better my communication? My starting point was to work on my listening skills.
Yeah.
Because I had so many situations where in the back of my head, I'm not listening, I'm just thinking about what's for tea tonight, or what I'm going to buy down the shop. And a lot of the stuff that I struggled with is I didn't listen properly initially, and once I started to do that, my communication just helped massively as a direct result of that, because I get a little bit of understanding not only about my own thoughts, feelings, emotions, but other people as well. So
it might be worth researching active listening. That's a really good tool around active listening. And it's going in with that view of like, it's not because you're maliciously not trying to listen. It's just sometimes, as you say, we have lives.
Yes, of course we do.
In the timings might not be right, and you're thinking about all the different things you've got to do today.
Yep.
Working on that skill isn't something that's a fault. It's just something that we do naturally, I think. And also kind of just not taking too much responsibility for it, too much fault, too much blame. we go straight to if we want to improve communication, that it's something that it's at our fault. And remember that when we're changing any communication, it's about our personal communication skills, not bettering a relationship or bettering a communication conversation between two people, because you can't control the other person. You can only control how you communicate. And if you've done that, then it's not necessarily a communication issue, but it is something you can reflect on, and it is something that you can go in and say, that wasn't my responsibility, or actually I could have done some things better, but it's okay, I can work on that. You're not at fault for having problems in communication, you're not at fault for struggling with it, and you're not at fault if you need to reach out. Lucy, you said in the comment about getting family counselling, getting somebody like a mediator. That is so important. If you need to do that, that is absolutely okay, and there is absolutely no shame in getting another perspective. That's how we do it. We do a lot of reflection in our work. We do a lot of supervision in our work. Yep. We do that for the exact reason of sometimes we need the third party. We need the helicopter view.
Yeah,
and that is not something to be ashamed of, and it's actually really productive for communication. Really productive.
So anyway, hopefully guys you've got some kind of insight how important that is to us in terms of our mental wellness. We do this every week, so hopefully we'll see you again next Friday, 12 o'clock on the platforms that you're watching on. And it's been a pleasure taking your questions. And those of you that we haven't got round to your questions, I do apologise, but if they come pretty thick and fast, we can't get everyone. So we'll see you next week.
If you want to find out more about what we do and who we are, please have a look on our Facebook, or our website is iseropia.uk. There's loads of topic videos around communication and communication skills, and a lot of different mental health subjects like anxiety, confidence and self-esteem, low mood and depression. There's loads of videos, there's a lot of interactive stuff, so please feel free to get involved with what we do here. And if you're on the Isle of Wight and you need some mental health support, you can access us through the mental health practitioners at your GP surgeries, or through single point of access or the mental health hub. And if you're under a mental health service already, an NHS mental health service, you can be referred through them as well. So please, if you do feel you need that support, you can reach out to us as well. But take very good care. We hope to see you next week, and have a lovely weekend, everybody. See you later.